Let's look at Nikon's new Z 7200mm f2.8 lens for their Z series of full-frame mirrorless cameras. I'm Ken Rockwell, and this is kenrockwell.com. Thanks for watching today, and let's take a look first at some of the pictures I can make with this lens. It does great close-ups. Of course, with anything close like this, there's usually nothing in focus. This picture of a yellow hibiscus was made at 200mm at f8 at a 250th at auto ISO 64. I added 2/3 of a stop negative exposure compensation to keep the red channel from blowing out with such a bright yellow. And there we have it. Of course this lens is sharp. All of Nikon's 80-200 and 70-200 2.8 lenses have been sharp since the 1980s when they first came out. Here's the money shot. This is shot wide open at f2.8 at 200mm at 1/1000th of a second at auto ISO 64. Now I'm scrolling down from the top here and I'm zooming in using my video editing software. This is a still frame shot of my Nikon Z7. And as you'll see, it's super sharp in the corners at the top where it's in focus. There's not much in focus at f2.8, but you can see the palm trees were. And so this lens is ultra sharp, just like all of Nikon's 70-200 2.8. So if you can't get a sharp picture, it's not the lens's fault. This is a fluff plant at 200mm f11 at 1/50th handheld at auto ISO 100. And sure, this lens is super sharp. That's not ever been the problem for any of Nikon's 2.8 telephotos. This is the latest in a long line of 70-200 2.8s. Nikon introduced the world's first 80-200mm f2.8 back in 1982. And here's one of the samples. Here's my personal copy. This beast here weighs a ton. It only focuses to 8 feet. But it is a beauty. This was designed back when Nikon used to be a leader and wanted to show the world what it could do that nobody else could do. Today, everybody makes one of these. The sad thing is, this is the first Nikon 70-200 or 80-200 2.8 actually offshored. They dumped this thing out to Thailand, which is really sad. I would most likely prefer the current 70-200 2.8 FL and use it with the FTZ adapter. That's quality made in Japan. It's also all metal. And strange enough, this lens weighs a little more and it's no smaller than the newest FL lens. I would probably go for the FL because this is all plastic on the exterior. The only metal parts are this foot and this trim ring on the back. The foot wins no prizes, which is really sad. Here's a lock for the foot. The foot comes off, but the collar doesn't. So if you're shooting handheld, all this junk stays in. This knob and this stump stay there. At least if you lose the foot, you still have a 1/4-20 socket. But this is an ugly thing to have to handheld. I hate these. I prefer the Canons that have a tripod adapter ring that actually come off. And again, for size, here's the 80-200 2.8 AFS lens, which I bought back in the year 2000. This, you'll notice the tripod collar comes completely off, so for handholding, it's fine. This is a beast of a lens, although to be honest, it's still the same size as this new lens, which when it came to mirrorless, Nikon didn't do us any favors in terms of size. It's not like the Canon lens, which is significantly smaller and lighter. This Nikon lens, I'm not that excited about because it's offshored. This collar is a pain. The collar doesn't come off. What's good about it is it does have 4 control buttons here, which you usually would program to focus lock. It has another here. It has this goofy OLED panel, which only does a couple of things. It doesn't automatically adapt its brightness to the conditions, so it's really kind of foolish. It's also not always on. To get it to work, you have to be plugged into a camera, of course. Then you've got to hold this for a moment, and then it'll work. And guess what? Then it turns off in 10 seconds, in which case, it doesn't really count. It's just a sales feature. And I don't think anybody wastes their time going to camera stores anymore. No, I don't. I just order online. And the great thing is when I use the stores that I recommend, and I've been using personally since the 1970s, in the case of Adorama and B&H and Crutchfield, this lens came from my friends at Adorama, and I've been shopping Adorama since the late 1970s, and they've always done fantastic. The key is, if you don't love it, you can send it back in 30 days and get your cash back 100%. And so I would never buy this thing at retail because it's an expensive lens. And if you buy it at retail, it's probably been taken out of the box. Nikon does not seal their boxes in any shape, manner, or form. People can take it out, mess around with it, just like ice cream at the store. People would open it up, lick it, and put it back. People can open up this lens, lick it, and put it back, and you wouldn't know, and you pay full price. An odd feature is there's a little hole here for a cable lock, like on a computer. I'm not sure we'd use that. This is a crummy little plastic flap, so this thing's going to come off in 10 years or so. The good news also is optically this lens is superb, as all the lenses have been. It is optically perfect as far as I can tell, although I'll get into some of the specifics a little later. It also focuses ultra close. You also have an extra control ring. This ring almost always does focus, and this ring you can program in your camera typically to control aperture or ISO or whatever you want depending on your camera. It is a rational 77mm filter size, and the filter thread at least is metal, which is a nice touch. But what is bad, again, compared to the fully professional 70-200 2.8 VRFL for the F-mount, which works great with the FTZ adapter, this is bigger and heavier and even more expensive, although it may vary from month to month, than the FL lens, which is a fully professional, made in Japan, all-metal lens. What's missing is, maddeningly, although this is a VR lens, there's no VR switch. You have to go back into a menu to do that. And do I want to go to a menu? Absolutely not. The FL lens does have a VR switch. There's no Arca Swiss dovetail on this. You'd figure it looks like it's made for it, but no, there's no dovetail, so you're going to have to buy an adapter plate if you want to use that system. Yes, you do have a autofocus manual focus switch and a focus limiter here. This lens only works on Nikon Z series of mirrorless cameras. You can't get an adapter mounted on a DSLR or a 35mm camera. Another advantage of the F-mount lenses are they'll work on all the cameras with the appropriate adapter to get to the mirrorless cameras. Autofocus is not that fast. Now, of course, that's shooting on my Z7, which does not win any prizes for autofocus. But to be honest, the FL lens are pretty much most of, like even that AFS lens I showed you from the year 2000 focuses much faster on a DSLR than this lens focuses on the Z7. Manual focus is excellent. Just grab this ring at any time and it just focuses manually. It'll give you instant override. It's purely electronic, but it does work and it always works, which is an advantage of the Nikon system over other systems. Other systems usually don't do that. Fuji and Sony have never figured it out. Canon almost does it, but you have to set some menu options in the Canon system, and then it only does it in certain focus modes. For focus breathing, which is the image changing size as you focus near and far, which is important if you're photographing motion pictures with this, you can breathe a sigh of relief that there's no obvious breathing. If you look way too hard at f/22 and cover the entire focus range, which nobody does, the image does get slightly smaller at the wide end, and it does get slightly larger at the long end, but no one's going to focus over that broad a range and be looking for focus breathing. If you're photographing actors and actresses at regular distances, it's flawless. Bokeh is neutral. And again, if you'd like the original files for any of these, just go to kenrockwell.com, links in the description, and I have all this down there. Here it is at 70mm at f2.8, and the bokeh is not that exciting. The blur circles are just circles. They're just circles. Nothing good, nothing bad. If you want to get the background as far out of focus as possible, just as with every zoom lens, set it to 200mm, shoot it wide open at 2.8, and get as close as you can. For distortion, most Nikon cameras are going to correct the distortion, and if you set that to on or leave it to on, there's absolutely no distortion. If you turn off the distortion control and then deliberately go looking for it, there's no distortion at the wide end, but from 105 to 200mm, there is a pretty healthy amount of pincushion distortion, which if you're shooting anything with straight lines parallel to the edges of the frame, you will start to see that. But just leave the correction on. Ergonomically, this front rubber ring is just trim and permanently mounted to the lens. When I shoot this lens, I like to hold it here by this front ring and then use my middle finger to zoom. And that's beautiful because this zoom, it's an internal zoom. The lens does not pump in and out as zoomed. And you can do this with one finger or two fingers if you like. But that is a beautiful thing. It zooms as it should. I don't feel the balance changing that much. And if we're looking straight up or straight down, it's still relatively easy to zoom with just a fingertip or two. So that is a wonderful thing. All these LFN buttons, this is LFN2, they all do the same thing. So as you go from horizontal to vertical shots, they all do the same thing. And this is another button that you can program. And you program those in your camera. This focus ring is heavily damped, probably to keep us from flicking it too fast. It doesn't flick as fast as the mechanically focused lenses did. This tripod collar, there are no clicks at 90 degrees. You can look for these little dots. Yeah, good luck on that. The lock and unlock mechanism works fairly well. This knurled ring here, you can program this to do other things, but it honestly, when you're shooting the lens, your hands are up here, and you have to pull way back to try to do anything with that thing. So it's nice to have that ring, but I don't think it's that much of an advantage. There's no visible fall off if you shoot the lens at the default of vignette control normal. If you go out of your way to turn vignette control off, there's a little bit of fall off at 2.8, but that's about it. For filters, this works great with filters. I can stack 6 regular 77mm filters and not get any vignetting at any setting anywhere. I actually found 17 filters and bolted them all on here. With 17 filters stacked about this tall, I get no vignetting as wide as 135. And yes, of course, I'll get vignetting at the wider settings. But overall, you can stack as many filters as you want, which means you don't have to pay extra for polarizers or grad filters that are extra thin. There's no problem with flare of ghosts. There's no problem with lateral color fringes. Nikon cameras since 2007 have all corrected lateral color fringes automatically for every lens, and there's no menu option to turn that on or off. If you shoot RAW and then open that data file in a non-Nikon brand piece of software to create an image from that, there is the potential that you might indeed find some color fringing, but I doubt it. Macro performance is ho-hum. Yes, it is ultra sharp, but it doesn't get all that close. It does focus very closely, though. This lens does focus closely, which is excellent because it means things rarely get in your face so much that you can't get them. This shot is wide open at 200 millimeters at f2.8 on my Nikon Z7 at 1/6400th of a second at ISO 64. And I'm zooming in here using my video editing software. It's not a zoom photograph. It's just an edited still image, and I'm zooming in so you can see the details, which looks great. Mechanically, everything is usually plastic. Most of the outside of this lens is plastic. The hood is a plastic bayonet. It does have a rubber front bumper, which is nice to keep you from banging into things. The filter threads are metal. The hood bayonet mount is plastic. There is no gold ED band. This is the first f2.8 tail that uses ED glass that does not have a 14-karat solid gold ED band on it. The front barrel, this is all plastic. The zoom ring, rubber-covered plastic. This barrel here, the middle barrel is plastic. Focus ring, rubber-covered plastic. This piece of the barrel here, plastic. Tripod collar and foot are metal. I've never seen a plastic one. Section just behind the tripod collar right here, this is plastic. This control ring's metal. This vanity cover here, this is metal. And the mount is metal. The internals seem like they're all metal, and that's important. So this is getting to be like a Canon lens, which is mostly plastic on the outside so your fingers don't stick to it in sub-zero temperatures, and mostly metal on the inside. There is a dust gasket here at the mount. The markings are mostly engraved or molded as engraved and filled with paint, so they're not going to wear off with use. With shaking this lens, it only makes a little bit of clunking. It's really a pretty solid lens. Nikon claims some magical compounds to combat spherochromatism, where autofocus highlights in the background of the foreground might take on colored fringes. The good news is, as I zoom in here on a shot, there really is no significant spherochromatism, which is superb performance. That means you're not going to have the backgrounds or foregrounds, autofocus highlights taking on little colored rings around them. This is excellent. Image stabilization, Nikon claims 5 stops. No. Like most lenses, they don't meet their claimed. At 70 millimeters on my Z7, which has internal stabilization as well, with firmware 3.11, I get a 3-stop real-world improvement, and I also get a 3-stop real-world improvement at 200 millimeters. Personally, when I'm standing, not bracing my elbows or any part of me on anything, and just standing freehand and not connected to anything other than my feet, I get perfect tripod-equivalent sharpness almost all the time at a 15th of a second at any focal length, which is very good, but it's par for the course. It's got a 9-bladed diaphragm, and so for Sunstars, I get pretty good 18-pointed Sunstars, but they have to be at the smallest apertures. Now, here at the large apertures, ignore that vertical smear. That's an interline transfer smear, which is an artifact of the camera. And then as I go to smaller apertures, at the smallest apertures, it gives me pretty good 18-point Sunstars. Now, ignore the little rainbow effects over there. Those are caused by interactions between the various pixel wells. Again, it's not the image coming out of the lens, it's how it's interpreted by the digital camera. The Nikon TC 1.4 and TC2 Z-mount teleconverters are rated to work just fine, and in my prior tests with F-mount lenses and F-mount teleconverters, the mirrorless system works far better. If you old-timers who used to shoot DSLRs may remember how awful teleconverters were because the image got dark and it wouldn't focus properly. No, mirrorless cameras love teleconverters. And that's it. That's just a few quick notes about the Nikon Z 70-200 2.8 lens. If you'd like to see all the details and all the precise distortion coefficients and measurements and you name it, go to the link at the end of this video or in my description and read it all and be able to download it all at kenrockwell.com. If you like what you see, of course you can subscribe. But the most important help and the biggest help to support all this work with my free website and these free videos is if you're going to get anything, please use my links that I provide. I provide them in the description here and on my website. I've used these stores forever. I've used Amazon for about 20 years, but most importantly, Crutchfield, B&H, and Adorama, from whom I got this lens, I've used those guys since the 1970s, back before commercial internet. They've always treated me right. They've always had great return policies. I can buy what I want, and if I don't love it, I can just send it back. I never have to sit around and watch an online review and go, gee, I wonder if I'm going to like it. No, the reason I buy this stuff with no fear whatsoever is I can always return it if I don't like it. So by all means, if you think you want it, you're going to love it, just get it. And if you hate it, you can send it back. But using those links when you get your stuff is the biggest help to keep me on the air. And I've been on the air at kenrockwell.com for over 21 years now. I've been shooting for over 50 since I was a very little kid. So that's why I've seen so much. And that's why I might seem a little opinionated. But it's the voice of experience. And I've won many major competitions in photography. You can see my gallery at kenrockwell.com and see some examples of the work I shoot, as opposed to just test shots with these lenses. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.